Did you know that it's theoretically possible to become diabetic not only on typical diets, but even zero carbohydrate diets like the carnivore diet? It sounds ridiculous and it's not easy, but if you really put in an effort, it is possible. Now, why would anyone actually want to do this? They wouldn't, but I'm just trying to prove a point that some of the things some of these online carnivore people are saying, all these carnivore teachers and influencers, is completely incorrect. And of course, there's a lot of good advice out there too, but there is one major pitfall that people fall into that maybe they won't get diabetes from it, but at the very least, it is impairing their progress. And if taken to the extreme, it could lead to diabetes and other horrible conditions. So I'm going to explain in this video that major pitfall, how to prevent it, and how to do the carnivore diet in a healthy way, or even low carb diets in general. Imagine one of your favorite meals, a juicy, delicious ribeye steak topped with a bit of creamy butter. A lot of people following a carnivore diet are thriving on these types of meals, reversing all sorts of nasty diseases and improving their health. But let's suppose this meal is flipped around to this. What if instead of a large steak with a small bit of butter, I, as a lean, healthy, disease-free individual, were to eat this form of a carnivore diet? Large slabs of butter with tiny pieces of steak. It turns out even if I did my best to eat the same number of calories as in the first picture, I would get sick. Over time, I would develop obesity, high blood pressure, and even diabetes. I'm already preparing to catch tomatoes from the imaginary crowd saying, Anthony, you've lost your mind. How can you possibly have high blood sugar if you don't eat any carbs? Well, the first thing to realize is that in a healthy person, the body does a pretty good job of keeping blood glucose stable no matter how many carbs are eaten. Sure, eating carbs will raise blood glucose after the meal because carbs are broken down into glucose, but those elevated levels are quickly brought back to baseline. When we're talking about diabetes, by definition, we're talking about blood glucose levels in a fasted state. So even if you do eat carbs and your blood sugar goes up, in healthy people, that's just temporary. Between meals, the liver creates more of its own glucose from glycogen in the muscle, which is just glucose in storage form. That's called glycogenolysis. If muscle glycogen is low, whether through prolonged fasting or on a low-carb diet, the liver can also make glucose from amino acids and other substrates. That's called gluconeogenesis. Getting more specific, when carbs from food get converted to glucose and enter the bloodstream, the pancreas secretes the hormone insulin to drive that glucose into tissue that uses it for energy, whether it's muscles, organs, or even bones. That insulin also tells the liver to tone down its own glucose production because there's already enough from food. Then after those carbs are digested, insulin levels fall and the liver can pick up the slack again. On the flip side, glucagon is the hormone that is more active during fasted periods and helps bring that muscle glycogen into the blood to cover the glucose shortage. Gluconeogenesis isn't shown in this diagram, but once again, that comes into play when muscle glycogen is scarcer. The takeaway is that given equally healthy, high-carb and low-carb diets, the liver performs a balancing act in such a way that fasted blood sugar levels are going to be normal and stable in both cases. So the question is, how does an unhealthy diet, whether it's a lot of carbs or no carbs, lead to elevated blood sugar? And what even is an unhealthy diet anyway? Why is the huge steak with a dab of butter healthy, while the giant slab of butter with tiny steak a problem? It all goes back to how energy is produced in a cell. Carbs and fats have different metabolic pathways, but they both end up as energy in the same way via the electron transport chain. Through this energy production pathway, there's always some oxygen leakage, creating superoxide radicals that can damage cells if not properly balanced by antioxidant defense. And that antioxidant defense depends on nutrients in the food, proteins and vitamins and minerals that create a multi-layer system to reduce reactive oxygen species and prevent their accumulation from damaging cells. And if you look at my previous video, I go into a lot more detail on this. So now we're getting somewhere because we realize that a large steak contains the necessary nutrients to counter the oxygen radicals created from energy metabolism from the fat, while the large slab of butter does not. That means with a mostly butter diet in the absence of proper nutrition, you're just creating more radicals than the body can handle. But once again, how does that have anything to do with blood sugar? These oxygen radicals and their derivatives cause damage to neurons that regulate the autonomic nervous system. So when these neurons go into repair mode, they can't receive proper hormonal signaling that the body is sufficiently fed. So these neurons in turn direct the body to adapt to starvation even when the body is being fed plenty of energy. Note that during real starvation, the liver needs to create a lot of glucose to prevent blood sugar from dropping to dangerously low levels, because you need some amount of glucose to feed the brain at least, otherwise you die. But imagine a situation where your cells do have sufficient energy, whether it's from carbs or fats, and the liver is still producing glucose as if the body does not have enough energy. That's how type 2 diabetes develops. Everyone seems to think diabetes is caused by obesity, but obesity is just another adaptation to oxidative stress-induced impairments in neuronal signaling. We have to start thinking about these diseases as the result of autonomic adaptations instead of people magically choosing to eat too much. And that's going to revolutionize how we see health and treat diseases as a society. So as for what these carnivore influencers a lot of the time are giving bad information about, is they're basically advising people to just go crazy with the fat, eat as much fat as you want. And it's true that if you're eating no carbohydrates, you do require a lot of fat, but still the foundation has to be on the nutritional foods, the meats, the fish, the eggs, and not necessarily adding a lot of fat manually to your meals, unless for some reason you're expending so much energy that it demands that you do so. So just have to remember that it's more about the actual nutrition than it is about fat being some magical substance that's better than sugar, because in reality, in terms of energy metabolism, they end up the same. If you want to learn more about my cutting-edge metabolic disease model or nutritional philosophy in general, or how it ties to all kinds of other diseases and our understandings of what's going on in the body, you can subscribe, watch my previous video that I made, go to my blog, stopbigfood.com, and just pay attention to what I'm saying, and communicate with me in the comments if you have any thoughts, or perhaps if you want to contribute any understanding of your own, because we're in this together and we're trying to resolve all these nutritional puzzles as a team, not just me. So I'll see you next time.